Welcome to episode 8 of AMEB's Break the Isolation webinar series. Today we're talking all about music theory with theory specialist Andrew Raiskums. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, and we recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay respects to them and their cultures and to elders both past and present. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fiona Sears and I'm the Head of Examining at the Federal Office of AMEB. For today's webinar on theory, we asked people to submit their questions in advance, and we've received a lot of really great questions that are definitely going to keep Andrew busy for the next 30 minutes or so. There is a chat function on Zoom, so if you would like to ask something or connect with your fellow viewers, look for the little speech bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. Alana is behind the scenes and she'll put some relevant links up and maybe able to answer some of your additional questions as well. One of the main reasons we decided to talk about theory this week is the overwhelming response we had when we announced that our online courses were free. We wanted to do this to give something to our community of students, teachers and parents during this time of isolation. And unbelievably, we've had nearly 30,000 people download our courses. For today's webinar, we've received questions that cover some of the basics of theory, as well as some very advanced questions. So we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. My colleague, Andrew Raiskums, spent many years teaching piano and theory at schools around Melbourne and has been the theory specialist at AMEB for 10 years. And he is the author of our Theory of Music books, grades 1 to 3. So Andrew, welcome, hello. How are you coping with the, good, how are you coping with the COVID isolation?
Going very well. Let's just say I've been very productive.
Good. Yeah, I found that I've done more than I expected as well, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with a very general question.
Yep.
What is music theory and why is it important for people who may be learning an instrument?
Well, I think when you start learning an instrument, you sit down and you learn scales, you learn chords, you learn keys, you learn to play melodies. Music theory is really the nuts and bolts, the mechanics behind these things. And I've always maintained that if you start to learn music theory at the earliest stages of your musical education, it accelerates your progress because you're making connections. You know, for example, you know, you understand the tension between tonic and dominant, and you know, you look for that in the pieces that you're studying, and suddenly it sort of opens up a whole lot of opportunities. And I think it's incredibly important, and I've always encouraged students to get onto theory as soon as they can.
Fantastic. And what's available for people who want to take up music theory? Of course, here at AMEB we offer quite a few things. Would you like to just talk us through some of those?
Sure. Well, we've got 3 different theory streams. We've got theory of music, which is the oldest and most established. Then there's musicianship, which introduces an oral component from grade 4 upwards. And then there's music craft, which was developed to sort of address other ways of looking at things, and also to sort of look at things that weren't included in theory and musicianship. For example, in music craft, students engage with modes fairly early on. They learn the Helmholtz system of note naming, just to name 2 things. So, you know, there's a lot of choice there.
Yeah.
We've got online courses available for theory, grades 1 to 3, but they can also be used with musicianship to a certain extent for the same grades 1 to 3. There's no course as such for music craft, but there are, you know, the books for music craft are incredibly detailed, you know, and there's books for teachers as well as for students. The theory courses, I wrote those quite a few years ago now, and what we did is we uploaded those with video content for each lesson. So, you know, there's the downloadable PDF, but there's also video. We've got people speaking through each chapter, each lesson, and then, you know, there'll be little musical examples on the screen for people to look at. So people who download the courses should have access to that as well. The courses we developed into the theory books, grade 1 to 3. The books, we call those integrated course and workbooks. They've got questions that are attached to each lesson. There's an actual AMEB exam at the end of each book, and if that wasn't enough, there's solutions to all the questions in the book available as a free download. There are online exams, obviously. We've had the online exam platform going for many years now. Yeah. And the online, that's for all three, music, for theory, musicianship, and music craft. There are practice exams for all of those. And of course, there are still paper-based exams available from our exams website. So there are loads of resources we have for people who want to study theory. And I encourage you to get online and have a look at all these things. Yeah, lastly, if you're wanting to keep your theory going at this time, I would recommend that, you've got all these resources, but get hold of a teacher as well, particularly for the higher grades, because they can guide you through the more tricky things. Just lastly on that, Fiona, I know I've spoken a lot here. I just wanted to mention too that for contemporary theory, we've got resources as well. So that, for students who want to look at, say, jazz or blues or improv, we've got rock school theory, grades 1 to 8 available as an online resource as well. So I thought maybe because this is your thing, you might actually like to have a quick word about this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we did actually have a question from somebody asking, they've studied a lot of classical theory and they were wanting to branch out into jazz and blues and improv. So yes, definitely recommend the rock school theory. And I think Alana's just put up the link to the rock school page, and which you can follow. And if you're interested in covering theory that contains some of those more contemporary chords and scales and concepts, then that might be the thing for you. That's great. One thing about the teachers, I think it's worth people either contacting their Music Teachers Association or perhaps their state office for suggestions. And the state office is obviously the place to go if you want to enroll for any of those exams. So we might start by talking about some questions that we've had about the early grades, so grades 1 to 4. So we might kick off with talking about form. We've had quite a few questions about form, and some people are finding it tricky. One person asked, I can easily work out binary and ternary form, but what about from grade 3 onwards? Can you help, any tips for helping me with that?
Okay, that's a fairly simple question, I think. At grade 2 level, candidates need to know the difference between binary form and ternary form. Ternary form obviously has a repetition of the opening A section. So it shouldn't be that hard to sort of perceive the difference between a binary and a ternary form melody. At grade 3 level, students have to learn rondo form. And that's kind of like an extension of ternary form. Instead of ABA, it's now ABA-CA. There are 2 episodes, that's the B and the C section, and there's 3 iterations of the A section, and it's called rondo form for that reason, because it keeps coming around. Now, rondo form obviously is going to be longer than ternary form, so that's an obvious thing to think about. There's also, what you really need to do is to identify where the repetitions are occurring, where the A sections are, and but also you need to look a little bit further into that. And have a look at the differences between those iterations of the A section, because they probably won't be all exactly the same. And one of the key elements here is the use of anacrusis, for example. So, a melody may have an anacrusis on the A section at the beginning, but then that might disappear for the next one and for the last one, or some sort of version of that. So what we're really wanting you to do is to have a look at the A section and just sort of try and perceive the differences between them. I think the B and the C sections will always be quite obvious for rondo form, but look at the A sections and just sort of have a look and see how they may be subtly different, both in terms of the notes, There may be rest introduced, this kind of thing. We just want you to look a little bit further into the A section and what might be going on there.
Somebody actually specifically asked, you know, what tips have you got for how to find the start and end of those sections? So is that what you mean by looking for the anacrusis, or would rests help as well?
Yeah, exactly. So what's going on with the anacrusis? If there is an anacrusis, are there rests? Have notes been sort of, have they been lengthened or shortened? These sorts of things. We're just wanting you to engage a little bit more with what's going on there, rather than expecting straight repetition.
Okay, great. Okay, so another question that's come up is about note values. So I guess this probably applies right from the beginning, from grade 1. Is there a cheat sheet for remembering note values? Have you got any tips about that?
Well, we learn the names of the note values, and I think that's what they might be referring to, that it might be hard to remember things like semibreve, minim, crotchet, quaver, semiquaver. Those, it might be helpful to consider, say, the American system of naming notes, where a semibreve is called a whole note. And then if you divide, which is 4 crotchet beats, obviously. And then if you divide that, you get 2 half notes. And then if you divide one of those half notes, you get quarter notes. It may be useful to try and see all these notes as being like fractions, you know what I mean? Sort of all relating to the semibreve at the top, and then sort of working down the chart, just sort of seeing it in a numeric way, rather than trying to learn those complicated words that sort of name the notes.
And I think there's actually a nice chart in the grade 1 theory book, isn't there, that sort of shows the semibreve broken down into note values.
The pyramid of notes.
The pyramid, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, the next question we have is about beaming. I'll just read it out. It says, please discuss beaming of semiquavers and quavers in 3/8 time and in 3/4 time. And if there are any fundamental differences or definite no-nos regarding beaming in either of these time signatures.
Right, so this is actually a very interesting question. In a 3/4 bar, if you have 6 quavers, it's perfectly fine to beam them as a group of 6, with a beam right across all 6 quavers. But you can also beam it as 4 plus 2, but you can't beam them as 2 plus 4. And I think the reasons for this may be beyond our webinar today. But yeah, I think the short answer to that question is that there are alternatives. There's no one method that is empirically correct. You've got a couple of options there, and that also applies to 3/8 time as well. If you have 6 semiquavers in a 3/8 bar, you can beam them all across and have a group of 6. You can also have 4 plus 2, but you can't have 2 plus 4. If you want to know why, have a look in the course or have a look in the book, because I talk a fair bit about it.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to melody writing. So we had quite a few questions about this. So somebody asked, what's the best way to learn how to write a good melody for grades 3 and 4? That's
a question that is not going to have a simple answer, I have to say. But I do have a list of points that I would say you'd need to check off one by one as you are writing a melody. I think the first thing that you have to do is read the text if there is text, and exaggerate all the stresses in the text. Like, just literally read it aloud and exaggerate it, and do it a few times if you're uncertain, and then work out whether the text scans best in 2s or in 3s. Like, you know, automatically a word like beautiful, that's 3 syllables, and so, you know, you might want to, you know, everything might just sort of fall into simple patterns of 3. It might not, but you know, that's a sort of like to me, it's a bit of a giveaway. Then sit down and work out a basic rhythm for the melody, for the text. Just plan it out, write it out. A very basic one, doesn't have to have a lot of flourishes in it, just a very straightforward melody. And then go into that straightforward melody and vary it. So look for passages where there's regularity and try to break up the regularity. Just make the rhythm interesting as much as you can. Doesn't need to be too much, but just sort of break up patterns of regularity. You can use things like dotted rhythm or, you know, semiquavers or triplets or things like that. If you're writing a melody to text, go back to the character of the text. Does it want to move fast? Is it slower and more reflective? Just, you need to ask yourself these sorts of questions.
Okay.
Choose a key, write in the opening bar, write in the closing bar, write in the end of the first phrase, work out where the climax is, put that in, and then fill the whole thing out. Just bit by bit, note by note. And then I think it's really, really important when you're starting to write melodies is to play them or sing them, listen to them and critique your own work. What do you like about this melody? What do you not like about this melody? Make notes. Just be really critical with what you've written. And I think that at an early stage when you're studying theory, I don't think it's good enough just to sort of plop notes on a page or on a computer screen. I think you need to listen to it, and you need to have an oral appreciation of what you're doing or what's going on. You know, spend some time with it.
Yeah. We did get a rather interesting question that we thought was worth asking on the subject of melody writing.
Yeah.
The person asks for your thoughts on the use of augmented intervals if it suits the text. So, you know, what are your thoughts on the use of augmented intervals in melodies to words if the use of augmented intervals suited the text?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting question because at grade 4 level, students have to write a melody in a major key or a minor key, but we haven't introduced the melodic minor scale yet, which actually solves a lot of difficulties for writing melodies in minor keys. So at grade 4, it's a very important thing to be able to negotiate the augmented second, or to know what to do with the augmented second in a melody, because it's an awkward interval. But if you listen to a lot of folk music, particularly say gypsy music, the augmented second is used all the time in an almost kind of like obsessive way. And so students who sort of are familiar with that music are maybe coming to this thinking, well, why can't I use the augmented second? You know, because it actually sounds really great. Well, for grade 4 theory, that can come later on. But to begin with, you need to know why the augmented second is problematic. And also, if there's a section of your melody that needs it, you need to know how to resolve it. So I would say, firstly, try to avoid it for grade 4 and perhaps even grade 5 theory. Secondly, I would say if you're going to use the leading note, approach the leading note from above. Say if you're in A minor, you know, come from above the G sharp. Or if you want to lead up to the leading note at the end, maybe go F, E, G sharp, A, and that actually gets rid of the exposed augmented second. These sorts of things, but you need to go through this with the teacher.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
We better move along, but just to summarize for those doing early grades, what would you say are the most common errors and some tips on how to avoid making those?
For melody writing?
Just in general. So I remember you said to me yesterday that one of the most common mistakes was people just not reading the question properly. Right.
Okay. I would say that there are 4 things that 4 tips that I would have. The first is know all the syllabus. You can't do these exams having not studied certain parts of the syllabus, particularly if it's difficult. So make sure that you've gone through and have an understanding of every part of the syllabus. As the exams go up, particularly 5 and 6, the creative aspects of theory become more important. They're more heavily weighted on the paper. You can't pass the exam if you haven't learned that material, okay? You can't pass it if you've just learned all the rudimentary stuff. You've got to learn the creative stuff. Secondly, you've got to read the questions, okay? And you've got to read them carefully. If we're asking for a melody to go in that direction, in the descending direction, you're not going to get marks if you write it going that way, okay? You actually need to engage with every part of the question and not do what you think is right, okay? Or what you
So
think.
I guess that applies to transposition as well as scale, direction, and things
Exactly.
like that.
You know, this is a common one. Students misread the question and say we've asked them to transpose something up, and they've automatically gone down because it feels more comfortable. We may not be asking them to do something that's comfortable. We may be asking them to something that uses ledger lines, you know, either above or below the stave. So read the question carefully. The third point I would say is make your answers succinct. So if we've got, say, a written response that's worth 3 marks, we don't need half a page answer. What we need, the three marks that we're asking for usually are asking for 3 pieces of information. So, and you can even put those down in point form, 1, 2, 3, or something like that. Okay. You know, we don't need 500 words for a short answer question. Usually what happens is that I know that candidates like to throw a lot of stuff down on the page, but that doesn't demonstrate to us that you understand the question, okay? So keep your answers short and succinct. The last thing I would say is do the practice exams and do as many of them as you can. Familiarize yourself with the whole format and just really sort of, when you go in to do the exam, you'll know exactly what's required.
Because sometimes it's just just managing that online space and the technology behind it that people struggle with. So that sounds like good advice.
And that's a very good point, Fiona. You know, you've got to learn to navigate the online platform.
Okay, we're going to move on because we're going through our time pretty quickly, but we did want to spend a little bit of time talking about harmony. So we've received quite a few questions. This seems to be a bit of a hot topic. Can you just give us a quick overview of what are we talking about here, and why is harmony writing a standard learning outcome for theory students?
Right. Well, up to grade 3, we're focused mainly on what I would call the horizontal aspects of music learning. That is scales, melodies, these sorts of things, single lines, you know. When we get into grade 3, into grade 4, harmony brings us into the vertical aspects, piling notes on top of each other, learning to write chords, learning to write 4-part harmonies, these sorts of things. And they need care in their manipulation. They need care. And so that's why I think a lot of students sort of fall down with this stuff, because they go with what they might expect. For example, you know, if I sit down at the piano and play a whole stream of root position chords one after the other, well, that sounds really good. And, you know, a composer like Debussy, his pieces are full of them. Why can't I write those in 4-part harmonies? Well, it's not that. It's actually that we want to go back to these principles of writing harmony that have existed for hundreds of years, and just use that. Just work with that, and then you can actually apply it to what you're doing in your pieces as well. Okay, brilliant. We might move to a few specific questions on harmony. I've got one here. What is the quickest way to write piano style cadences? Can I lay it out in vocal style first and then translate it into piano style? Would that work? Piano style is, I have to say, a little bit vexing for some people. Just going back to what I said before, they think that piano style might be just sort of, you know, plopping chords, root position chords one after another. That's not piano style. Piano style is, okay, we want the note in the bass, the left-hand note, and then we want the other 3 notes of the harmony in the right hand, in close position, that is, within the space of an octave. Now, when you move from one piano style chord to the next, you have to use the principles of vocal style writing. That is, even though we're calling it a chord, it's actually a collection of voices that are moving from one chord to the next. And so when you move, you need to invoke the principles of 4-part vocal style as well. So all of these notes need to move specifically, okay? I think that's the best answer I can give at this point.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. We had another question about asking, you know, how do I choose the best chord? If I'm presented with a melody and I've got a choice of several options,
Yep.
you know, how do I choose which is the best chord?
Okay, so this would apply to grades 4 and grades 5. Yeah, look, I think, again, it comes down to engaging with the syllabus and what the syllabus is asking for. So for grade 4 and for grade 5, you've got lots of options for chord choices, more so in grade 5. But even for grade 4, we need to know that you know how to use first inversion chords. And when you're writing a harmony, you actually need to show us a balanced presentation of root position and first inversion chords. So for 4th grade, for example, I would, you know, you obviously have to use root position chords for the cadence points in the melody. But then we talk about the approach chord and how the approach chord is most often a first inversion chord. It doesn't have to be, but it's good if it is. And if you can make it, if you can use the first inversion chord there as the approach chord, then use it. But I think a lot of people think that each note sort of, you need to sort of have a different, you know, a different harmony for each note. But if you look at the melody, you know, the top line of the harmony, if there are notes that are a third apart, you don't have to use different chords for those. You can use different positions of the same chord. So you could use chord 1 and 1B, and then maybe 4 and 4B, this sort of thing. So there are strategies. But overall, we need to see that you know how to use first inversion chords.
Brilliant, good advice there. Okay, just the final question on harmony. Could you please explain what exposed consecutive fifths and octaves are, as opposed to consecutive fifths? Right.
So I felt it was important that in 3rd grade theory that we talk about exposed fifths and octaves, because they are problematic. And if say a 3rd grade student writes exposed fifths or octaves, then in my mind, you have to take some marks off, because it's a fundamental fault. So what it means is that it's between the outer two parts, the soprano and the bass. They're both moving towards an exposed fifth or octave in the same direction. If the soprano moves by step, that's okay. But if the soprano leaps to the exposed fifth, then or octave, then that's really bad. Again, look, it may be beyond the scope of the webinar to talk about all of this, but I talk about it a lot in the course and in the book. So in grade 3 theory, so have a look in there.
Okay, fantastic. We're nearly at our 30-minute mark, but we're going to keep going because we just want to address some of the more advanced questions that we've had. We've got quite a few people who are sitting there 5th and 6th grades, and also some of our diplomas. Perhaps you could just tell us what are the options, you know, available to people who are wanting to do these higher grades?
Right. Well, theory has actually undergone quite a lot of change in the last few years. So we got rid of grade 7, we got rid of grade 8, and now students who want to do associate or licentiate diplomas now have choices as to what stream they want to specialize in. So, you know, if you're doing associate diploma in theory, now you can do musicology, you can do harmony and counterpoint, or you can do orchestration and arrangement, and likewise in licentiate. What this means, though, is that there's a bit of a gap now between grade 6 theory and the associate diploma. I think there's a fair amount of material that sort of needs to be filled in, I think, between grade 6 and associate. And again, I would say that you probably need to look at what the exams are asking you to do, and I would engage a teacher to help you through, to sort of, you know, get over that bridge from grade 6 to associate, because there's a fair amount of material to cover, and you do need to be able to sort of get yourself there.
And am I right in saying that you've seen a few exam papers from diploma students who have clearly tried to do it without a teacher, and it's not always successful?
It's usually pretty obvious
Mm-hmm.
when students who are doing the higher grade exams haven't had a lot of instruction or guidance. And I think that, you know, really at these levels where we're asking you to do complicated things, and there's lots of room for error. So I would say that you really need to get a teacher to guide you through. I wouldn't recommend trying to do one of these higher exams on your own.
No. And quite a few people have asked, you know, what sort of books would you recommend for harmony and history knowledge? Is that something that you think they should talk to their teacher about as well?
Absolutely. The first thing I would say is that there's a lot of rubbish on the internet. And there's also a lot of conflicting information on the internet. So for these exams, I would not be going to the internet. You really want to make this as easy for yourself as possible. And I would say, again, go to a teacher who's got experience, because they will know the texts that you need to get, that you need to read from to learn the appropriate material. I feel like I'm really getting behind the theory teachers today, but I actually feel really good about that.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, people, probably the best place to go is to your state office. If you contacted your state office, they'd be able to put you in touch with, I mean, especially for the higher levels, some of our AMEB examiners, you know, are absolutely the perfect people to teach, and can probably teach online. Theory is, you know, suitable for teaching online at this time as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so our last little topic here is the set works. We do have explanation of the new set works, because there's been a few changes recently, haven't there?
Yes,
we've got some explanations up on the website that I think Alana will put up for us.
Yep.
Did you want to talk a little bit about the set works and the changes?
Yeah, I will. I think it was about a year and a half ago, we decided that we wanted to change or revise some of the set works that were for musicianship and theory grades 5 and 6, but also for the licentiate musicology diploma. I just felt that, you know, for theory grade 6, the first and second movements of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony was a tough call, particularly for students who'd been only looking at sonata form for the first time. And I know how tough, because I was the one that ended up writing the analysis of these movements. And I can tell you, it did not take me, it actually took the better part of 2 weeks for me to do. So I thought we definitely needed to change that, and we did. So we've broken that down so that you've got a movement from a symphony, a movement from a piano concerto, and a Baroque overture. So what we did is we decided to change all these things around, but we also wanted to make sure that we had support materials for teachers and for students for these new set works. So we actually commissioned someone to write a set of analytical notes for us, Simon Perry from the University of Queensland. And he's done a stupendous job on all of these new set works. And so we divided them into two. So there's the set works for theory, and then there's the set works for musicianship. They're available as separate purchases online. And I recommend that if you are interested in these set works, get online, buy them, and have a look.
Fantastic. I've just got one other question on the set works, which kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Somebody asked about how many words are expected for the analysis questions. You don't really need an essay, do you?
Look,
but
just pulling up on what I was saying about the set works. The analyses that we've provided are exhaustive. You know, they go into every single possible detail in these pieces. And for the exams, we're bound by the syllabus. You know, we can only ask what we can ask. You know, so there's probably more than enough information in the analytical works for you, but Yeah, look, we're only looking for, again, fairly succinct answers, you know, a couple of lines. If the question's worth 2 marks, we're probably looking for 2 pieces of information. Or, you know, if the question's worth 5 marks, then maybe there's 5 pieces of information. These sorts of things. We're just looking for straightforward, succinct responses to the questions.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we've kind of run out of time, so there's quite a lot of questions we haven't got to, but I just wanted to finish with this, my favourite question, which I'm not sure I even understand, but here we go. Andrew, in 10 seconds, could you please explain the concept of tritone substitution and its application?
In 10 seconds. Okay, well, all I can say is that tritone substitution is not in our syllabus. You could probably talk about it at you know, in the diplomas, but it's really all about replacing the dominant with the tritone above or below the dominant. So, you know, if your tonic is C major, then the tritone substitution will put F sharp as the dominant instead of G, that sort of thing. You know, and I immediately think of a composer like Scriabin, who pioneered the use of tritone substitution. So if you want to find out more about it, go and listen to some of his music.
Fantastic, and study the scores carefully.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you to everybody who's been listening today. That's all we have time for. I'm sorry if we haven't got to your particular question, but we may be able to come back and do another webinar at some time, at some stage. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your knowledge with us, and also to Alana, who's been in the background feeding us all those helpful links.
Thank you.
Please check out our Here to Help page, which is on the AMEB website. We've got some really great resources and ideas up there, things to keep you going during this period working from home. And we have some more great webinars planned for the coming weeks. On May the 12th, we'll be talking to conductor Ben Northey on the topic of music in a time of crisis, which I think will be really great. So join us for that chat with Ben. So thanks again, Andrew. Great to hear your pearls of wisdom, and goodbye, everyone.